Hello, my name is Ebony Williams. The farmer has to be an optimist or he wouldn't still be a farmer. Will Rogers. The previous quote is true. The harsh reality is that farmers face numerous challenges in their everyday lives. They face extremely labor intensive, fast paced, and hazardous working conditions. This includes exposure to extreme weather, workplace hazards, pesticides, and other chemicals. They lack health insurance and have insufficient protections for their rights. This is the concept of agricultural exceptionalism, the exclusion of food or agriculture from federal and state laws aimed at protecting the livelihood and well-being of other industries and workers. Let's discuss the history of agricultural exceptionalism. Enslaved people began working in the fields in the early 1600s. However, it was not until the end of the Civil War, also known as the Reconstruction period, that agricultural laws were characterized by systematic exclusion of black farm workers from basic protections. This is the first example of agricultural exceptionalism. Black codes existed in 1865. These were also known as Jim Crow laws. These were particularly related to the minimum wage, overtime pay, and the rights to organize for black farm workers. This pattern of discrimination has continued to impact farm workers' lives and has persisted throughout discriminatory legislation and policy, even with the passage of civil rights legislation. While slavery was abolished in 1865 with the 13th Amendment, and ratified with the 14th Amendment in 1867, the 15th Amendment of 1870 granted the right to African Americans to vote. However, many formerly enslaved persons were still indebted to landowners and continued to work in the field as sharecroppers or tenant farmers until the mid 1900s. 1833, as a part of the New Deal, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed into law the Agricultural Adjustment Act, AAA. It aimed to boost the agricultural prices by reducing surpluses. The government bought livestock for slaughter and paid farmers subsidies not to plant on parts of their land. It included a prolonged period of dust, severe drought, and darkened skies that lasted for a period of days. It led to many farmers having to migrate from their farms, sell their farms, and go looking for work. It was one of the most economic downfalls in agricultural history. While the Dust Bowl destroyed millions of acres of farmland and forced the farmers to sell their lands and migrate, the Great Depression coincided with this time. It is the largest economic downfall in U.S. history. There was a lack of jobs. However, the U.S. government decided to pass a series of laws to protect workers, but excluded farm workers and domestic laborers. In 1935, President Franklin Roosevelt signed into law the National Labor Relations Act, NLRA. It is also known as the Wagner Act, after its chief sponsor, Senator Robert F. Wagner. It guaranteed employees the right to self-organize, join labor unions, and engage in collective bargaining. He also signed the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, into law in 1938. It created overtime rules and established the minimum wage, which did not cover seasonal workers. The FLSA also failed to include youth farm workers in the standards for youth laborers. The goals of these initiatives were to employ the unemployed, protect farmers from foreclosure, stabilize the economy, regulate the banking system, eliminate child labor, and conserve farmland. Both excluded agricultural and domestic workers. The Immigration and Nationality Act, INA, authorized a non-immigrant visa category known as H-2 for foreign agricultural and non-agricultural workers to come to the United States and perform agricultural labor or services of a temporary or seasonal nature. The law was later amended. The Migrant and Seasonal Agricultural Worker Protection Act was passed in 1983. It required for employers to disclose occupational expectations and comply with proper documentation in the workplace. It does not guarantee collective bargaining or freedom of association of rights. In 1986, the Immigration Reform and Control Act passes to allow Mexican workers citizenship. Due to agricultural exceptionalism relating migrants and seasonal workers, there were several notable strikes and boycotts. For example, the Delano grape strike and boycott occurred in September of 1965 and included over 1,800 Filipinos, the National Farm Workers Association, and also included the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee led by Cesar Chavez for an increased wages and peace weight for grapes. Cultural exceptionalism did not end with labor laws. It also extended to other laws, which included the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Animal Welfare Act, which exclusively exempt agricultural activities from these laws. For example, the Clean Air Act, it does not include routine agricultural operations in the air pollution. Nor does the Clean Water Act involve agricultural runoff, which is often controversial. The Animal Welfare Act does not apply to farmed animals, and the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act does not apply to chickens. The Right to Farm Acts of the 1970s and 1980s was put in place to protect the farmers from public and property owner complaints regarding noise, odor, visual clutter, and dangerous structures associated with agricultural operations. It protected the farmers from lawsuits. Does the concept still exist today? The answer is yes, and can be seen in recent regulations such as the FESMA of 2011, where farmers are excluded based on the type of farm, the commodity, and where it's sold. Child labor laws still do not apply to farm workers. Very hard to believe that farmers still lack health insurance and also lack protection from OSHA requirements. Immigrant reform is still necessary today. The Codex Alimentarius, or Food Code, is a collection of international standards, guidelines, and codes of practice to protect the health of consumers and fair practices in the food trade. While it ensures the food safety and quality of the products traded on a global level, it does nothing to protect the farm workers. What can be done for the future? There are states such as California and New York State who are doing their part to make it right. For example, California has implemented overtime for any farm worker who works greater than 8 hours a day or 40 hours per week. New York State has passed the Farm Laborers Fair Labor Practices Act to improve the working conditions of the farm workers. They are allowing for collective bargaining rights, eligibility for workers' compensation, and unemployment benefits, among other provisions. Current undocumented farm workers and their family members should be given a viable path to citizenship, a policy change that will recognize the reality of agricultural labor in this country. Farm workers should have the same economic and democratic freedoms that apply to other residents and workers in the United States. They should be fully able to participate in collective bargaining. In the time to watch my documentary.